Hour 10:15 having arrived, we'll call the House Tax Committee to order. Today's agenda, we are going to hear from House Fiscal, and then we have a bill up with some treats that if you're sitting where I am, you can smell them. They're hot. We probably should, no, we can't do it till the bill. That'd be out of order. We must have order. So with that, Representative Joy, do you have a motion?
Yes, to move the minutes.
Any additions or corrections? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. Minutes are adopted. So we'll start out, if you could please identify yourself for the record. And members, we have a House Fiscal today, and there's a lot of information in your packets from House Fiscal. And I believe, we'll be starting with this, right? Okay. Please proceed.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Templin, House Fiscal, from the House Fiscal Department. I am here with my colleague, Katrina Highmark. Together, we hope to build on the overview presented earlier by our House research colleagues. But in this presentation, we hope to provide the numbers and the fiscal and budgetary perspective on state taxes and property tax aids and credits. First of all, I want to check if I'm loud enough.
A little more.
A little more.
More maybe?
Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right. In this slide, you see our contact information. My area, well, for this presentation, we've broken it up into kind of two parts. And the two parts are tax revenues, and the other part is spending for property tax aids and credits. My area of focus is in state tax revenues, so please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about state tax revenues, and that's income tax, sales tax, corporate tax, and the other taxes that are not property taxes. And I'll turn to my colleague, Ms. Highmark.
Mr. Chair and members, I'm Katrina Highmark. I focus on the expenditure side of the tax committee. So my areas of focus are property taxes, including refunds and credits, as well as local government aids and credits. I also focus on mining and aggregate taxes, local special taxes, tax increment financing, fiscal disparities, and public finance. And I'll turn it back to my colleague, Cynthia.
Ms. Temple?
Both Katrina and I are from the House Fiscal Analysis Department, and like House Research, our department is also a nonpartisan office. There are 12 fiscal analysts that staff various finance committees. Some of our work products include legislative tracking sheets, reviewing revenue estimates, and reviewing fiscal notes. We also provide budget options and are able to do research on spending and revenue, on enacted spending and revenue proposals that were enacted in previous sessions in the state accounting system for any members that need any assistance. I also want to point out in your packets that you have 3 documents. One of them is an FAQ on revenue estimates. I know that for some of the new members that the new members went through a fiscal note training, but there's really not an equivalent revenue estimate training. So we hope this document answers some, pretty basic questions about revenue estimates. In addition to that, we also have a revenue estimate visualization of, how you read a revenue estimate. During the tax committee, you will receive revenue estimates and that come from the Minnesota Department of Revenue, and we hope that this explanation is helpful for you. And again, please reach out if you have questions. And then a third document is the spreadsheet for the House Tax Committee, and it shows current law expenditures based on the November forecast. All right, and I'm going to turn to my colleague, Ms. Highmark, to go through the budget terms.
Ms. Highmark?
Mr. Chair and members, there are some basic terms that you will hear used frequently by my colleague and myself, as well as maybe see some abbreviations in some of the information that is given to you. One is fiscal year, usually abbreviated FY. For the state of Minnesota, the fiscal year runs from July 1st to the subsequent June 30th. Tax years are on a different schedule. Those are abbreviated TY, and they run from January 1st to December 31st. You'll also hear the term biennium. We budget in Minnesota on a biennium, which is a 2-year basis. The current biennium is fiscal year 26 and 27. And we also can engage in budgeting for the tails, or also known as the planning years, which would be fiscal year 28 and 29 in this instance. You'll often hear us talk about the general fund, which is the largest fund in the state treasury. It's where receipts from different collections, such as taxes, are deposited. Receipts in this fund are not necessarily dedicated for a specific purpose. There are different funds in the state treasury, such as the special revenue fund, and those funds have a different treatment. Some funds have dedications where their funds are dedicated for a specific purpose. So I'll turn it back to my colleague Cynthia.
In this slide, you may have seen a legislative timeline of kind of the events, the fiscal events that are important during the legislative session. And this is a kind of a graphic, colorful timeline of the legislative session. And so on January 14th, obviously the first day of session, and then the governor's budget, that is required by statute. The governor is required to propose an operational budget recommendations on the fourth Tuesday in January. And this year, that's January 28th. And as you know, the governor already released those recommendations. His recommendations are based on the November forecast that was released a few months ago. And then in February, MMB will also present an updated forecast, and that forecast will be the foundation of the budget negotiations by legislative leadership. Then in March, the governor will then revise his budget recommendations based on the latest forecast. And then in true March Madness fashion, a budget resolution is also established in March for committee spending targets. By House rule, the budget resolution is required to be set 25 days after the last general fund forecast during the regular session in an odd numbered year, and that's in 2025. In April, typically, House bills go to the House floor and conference committees start. And then finally, the last day of the regular legislative session is May 19th, 2025. All right. And this first part of the presentation, again, is going to focus on tax revenues, and I have a couple of goals. So the overview that you heard earlier from our House research colleagues, they discussed the major tax types, how much they raise, their tax rates, and tax expenditures. I don't want to duplicate anything that they presented. Instead, the goals of this presentation are to show, based on actual data, to provide an understanding of the total revenue available to pay for Minnesota public services. Another goal is to provide an understanding of how much is collected in revenue and where the revenue is deposited. And then finally, I want to share with you the trends in year-over-year percentage changes in different revenue sources over a 10-year period. So in this slide shows revenues to pay for public services. It shows total taxes paid by Minnesotans plus the revenue collected by local units of government for the cost of government services. In fiscal '24, a total of $102.5 billion was collected from these sources. Please note that this graphic is not to scale. The point of this graph is to show the interrelationships of revenue. Starting with the smallest green circle on this slide, you can see the total amount of state taxes collected and deposited into the general fund is $28.3 billion. You can make this circle even bigger if you add state revenue from dedicated receipts. Adding dedicated receipts, dedicated tax receipts, I should say, adds another $5 billion to the total for all state taxes. That gets you to $33.5 billion in all state tax revenue. And then to make the circle even bigger, if you add local taxes collected from local units of government, that brings in an additional 12 to 13 billion in fiscal 2024 for a total of 46.5 billion collected in state and local tax revenue. So state and local taxes provides less than half of the total revenue that was needed to pay for public services in fiscal 2024. All right. So this pie chart, again, provides the percentage detail for all revenue in fiscal '24. It shows that 46% of total revenue comes from state and local sources. The other 54% is collected from non-tax revenue. So how much is collected? So state and local tax collections were in fiscal '24 totaled $46.5 billion. The state taxes share of the total, the dark green slice of the pie, equals 72%. State taxes includes, but is not limited to, like income tax, sales tax, corporate tax, and so on. The amount available from these taxes is affected by economic conditions that, cannot be controlled by the legislature. The amount from these state taxes, however, can be controlled by legislative decisions on tax rates, changes to the base, and the creation or repeal of tax expenditures. The other half of this pie chart shows local taxes collected from local governments, and that is 28% of the total. These local governments include special taxing districts and school districts. Of that amount of local taxes, the largest share of the total can be attributed to local property taxes levied by local units of government. How much control the legislature has over these levies and the amount of revenue raised will likely be discussed at length this session. For now, a revenue from local taxes is about 28% of the total. So getting even narrower, the next slide shows, again, just only state collections from all state taxes. In fiscal '24, again, $33.5 billion was collected, and of that total, 73% is generated from income tax and sales tax. Just a couple of words about income tax. Income taxes, the forecast for income taxes, growth has been slower. The projected growth in income tax is slower because of the growth in, there's lower average income that is projected for income taxes, and also the assumptions on capital gains realizations has changed, so growth for income taxes for projections going forward is slower. And sales taxes, which is another big percentage of the pie, is influenced by the growth in spending on goods, and the growth in spending on goods is slightly declining, where more spending on services is taking place. So sales tax is the revenue from sales tax receipts is slightly declining because of that. The other sections of this slide that aren't income tax and that aren't sales taxes are, You can see that corporate tax is only 9%, excise taxes on alcohol, liquor, and tobacco are 5% of the total, and then you have this 13% other category, which includes taxes on charitable gambling, the provider tax, solid waste taxes, and so on. Okay, so in this slide, it shows and goes even narrower, and the focus is even narrower. It just shows state collections, state tax collections that are deposited only into the general fund. The general fund, as my colleague said, is the largest fund in the state treasury, and receipts in this fund are not dedicated to a specific purpose. Total collections in fiscal '24 were $28.5 billion. 79% of the total general fund receipts comes, again, from income taxes and sales taxes when you look at just the general fund tax receipts. So you can see that these two tax types are kind of like the anchors of total state tax collections. The other 21% is generated from other taxes that are numerous, but total collections from these taxes is smaller. So in previous years, the House Tax Committee spends a lot of time reviewing bills on tax policy that affect taxes that are deposited into the general fund. The House tax bill, if there is one, will include changes to tax policy that increase or decrease revenues that will affect the amount of revenue available for other finance committees to spend.
Ms. Templin, your comments, if there is one? I've already got a name picked out, hasn't been publicly disclosed yet, but, so there better be one. You are correct, though, there doesn't have to be a tax bill.
So as noted on the, earlier on the session timeline, a budget resolution will be created by legislative leadership. The budget resolution will establish the amount of state expenditures and revenues for the next biennium by setting limits on net expenditures from, this account, the general fund. So in this next slide, we're going to do a little math. And in this slide, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but if you take all state tax revenue deposited into all state funds and subtract out state tax revenue that is deposited into the general fund, the difference is dedicated tax revenue. Dedicated tax revenue is often spent by tax committees, non-tax committees, I should say, like the Transportation Committee, the Human Services Committee, and Natural Resources. Over time, the percentage of dedicated state tax revenues has stayed roughly the same. About 85% of all state tax revenue is deposited into the general fund, and about 15% of tax revenue is deposited into non-general fund accounts or dedicated funds. There are constitutional dedications, such as the 3/8% dedication on the state sales tax rate to the legacy funds. That is a dedication that is expected, that will sunset in the year 2034. There's also another example of a constitutional dedication is the motor vehicle sales tax. That was enacted in 2006, and that is a permanent dedication that the funds from the sales tax of motor vehicles, 100% of those funds are dedicated to transportation for improving roads and highways. Other dedications that are not constitutional are statutory dedications. And again, the House Tax Committee hears lots of bills for statutory dedications of tax receipts. One example of a statutory dedication is the dedication on auto parts.
Representative Whitty.
Thank you, Chair Davids. Ms. Templer, so I'm kind of going backwards a little bit because I had my thoughts in my head. Individual income tax, you say, is kind of leveling off.
Yes.
Do we have a way to tell, we have a migration of people leaving the state. We've had some big corporations in Minnesota leave. Is there a way to break it down so we can see if that's having an effect on where that income is slowing down. I'm just curious as we kind of analyze this, because obviously we don't want it to decline, but we also think it could be tied to the top corporate tax level and if they leave, and that's something we've talked about before. So I was just wondering, is it possible to get any numbers like that?
Ms. Temple?
Mr. Chair and Representative, yes, that is a good question. And I have seen academic studies on migration and related to taxation. I have not seen any studies by independent organizations or MMB related to revenue, kind of the revenue loss related to migration. I can check, I can get back to you to see if I've seen, check again, but I haven't seen anything recently.
Representative Whitty?
Thank you, Chair Davids. Yeah, it would be interesting to know, because when these corporations leave, you're losing the CEOs who pay or are paid at a high level, but also the jobs below them.
Yes.
And a lot of people, that I've heard from are leaving because of taxes, because they can, when they get closer to retirement age or whatever. So I was just curious on a breakdown of that, just so we can tell if that is what's really slowing down the individual income tax, if there's any correlation.
Yes. Yes.
Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Whitty. I was kind of curious about that same question, and I didn't know when the right time to ask it. But is this also, wondering if this is, and I was worried about that so our unemployment rate still seems healthy, but is our employment rate healthy based on lower wages? That is basically building that up, or really is not showing the true picture. But also, is it an explanation more of why the governor's office also continues to find other ways to find revenue, is because they're reading the same tea leaves and realizing that the income tax is not going to be something that's going to be able to fund these programs going forward. So they're getting more and more creative of how we can either push down costs to the counties, yes, I'm going to bring up counties again, or figuring out how to expand what they can tax, because that's what they're seeing. So I think that's, a real eye-opener for us as we start looking at all these different areas and can actually raise some yellow flags. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Red flags.
Red flags. Try not to be hyperbole, yes. So.
Representative Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember seeing some population data, demographic. I thought we were losing population in all income categories except the bottom two. We were gaining population in the bottom. Do you know that data or have that data?
Ms. Temple?
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, that data is not, I'm not familiar with it right now, but I definitely can check into that and see if I can follow up.
Representative Anderson?
Yeah, thank you. I know it was out, it was in the press even, I think, a few months ago or something. But it's important that we understand that as we're talking about what's happening with the income tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Yes,
Please
Representative.
proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Anderson. I'm happy to look into that and follow up. So, okay, on this slide, just the other point I want to make too is just for statutory dedications. There's statutory dedications. One example is the dedication on auto parts. This is the dedication of sales tax receipts on auto parts for motor vehicle parts, tires, and accessories. This was enacted in 2018, and this dedication was expanded just last year to be 100% dedication of those receipts going from the general fund to transportation funds. And the dedication is phased in over 10 years.
Ms. Temple, what did we do last year on that?
Mr. Chair, the Transportation Tax Committee, before it was a fixed dedication for auto parts, fixed meaning a fixed dollar amount, and then, in 2023, I should say. In 2023, the Transportation Committee then changed that dedication so that it is 100% dedication of the receipts from auto parts to the Transportation Fund, and that dedication is phased in over 10 years.
You know, that's interesting. When I carried that bill, got into law in 2018, I got smoked. I mean, it was the worst thing. The sky's gonna fall. There'll be no money going to public schools. HHS is doomed.
Yeah.
And then they expanded it in '23?
Mr. Chair, the Transportation Committee, yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, well, I guess the sky didn't fall, did it? Please proceed.
Okay. All right. Okay, in this slide, the point of this slide is just to show that there are really two areas where tax receipts are dedicated, and that's mainly in sales taxes and in other tax revenue receipt areas. Income tax receipts, corporate tax receipts, and receipts on the state general levy, those receipts are not dedicated, and the receipts from those taxes go directly into the general fund. First, the dedication of sales tax receipts, in fiscal '24, the total is about $2 billion in dedicated sales tax receipts. The motor vehicle sales tax and the legacy tax are the largest sources of tax revenue for those dedicated purposes. Other taxes that are dedicated are the motor vehicle registration tax, that brings in about $900 million for transportation funds, as well as the motor fuels tax. That also brings in about less than $800 million for transportation purposes. And then the third other kind of largest source in that other category for other taxes is the provider tax. And that brings in around $700 million for health and human services spending. And then the final section of these slides, I'm just going to quickly review kind of trends and year-over-year changes in various state or tax receipts for state and local governments. In this first slide shows state tax revenue. And an understanding of kind of the percentage change and the pattern of tax receipts is helpful, when putting together a budget of revenues and spending. And as you can see, for state tax revenues, the line is not very smooth. From fiscal 15 to fiscal 2024, the pattern of year-over-year changes has been sort of volatile. And you can see in fiscal 20, in 2021, tax receipts in fiscal 20 were below zero in a year-over-year change, and then increased almost up to 15% in fiscal 2021. This next slide shows the revenue.
Excuse me, Ms. Templin. Representative Robbins?
Thank you. Ms. Timlin, if you wouldn't mind going back, or you're staying on this page for a second, or the previous one, I guess they look similar. What drove the jump in fiscal year 2021? Was it people got a lot more money because of COVID?
Madam Chair, Representative Robbins, I think that in fiscal 20, receipts were down significantly overall for all tax types. So the year-over-year growth was, almost below zero. And then in fiscal 21 and 22, receipts were increasing, and we saw receipts increasing for individual income tax and corporate tax. Those were some of the tax types that increased, as well as for sales tax. During those years, there was more a pattern of purchases on tangible personal products or goods, and so the receipts from sales taxes also increased.
Representative Robbins?
Thank you, because we would expect that it would go down from sort of the normal year during the COVID year, but the fact that it basically doubled when it went back up rather than just returning to the norm, is that mostly people's COVID money that they were getting as supplemental income, or what do you think was driving that?
Ms. Templin?
Madam Chair, I think, some of the, so this slide shows kind of year-over-year changes. So the change from fiscal '21 to fiscal '22 is, the change was so, I think the low was so low in fiscal '20 that, the increase, the percentage increase in year-over-year change looks so much higher. So, and I think that in fiscal '21 and '22, the income tax receipts were, returning probably to more normal levels, but the percentage change on a year-over-year basis looks pretty, spikes up. It looks, in a year-over-year kind of analysis, it looks so much higher.
Right.
Representative Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just, it's so striking that it's still never sort of moderated at that 6% level. Like it's way up, way down. That volatility is of great concern. So thank you.
Representative Whitty?
Thank you, Chair Davids. So looking at this, obviously, we know what hit at the end of 2019-20 that caused that. Does that, I'm just looking at it, would that suggest that the state of Minnesota was in a recession from 23 to 24 because we're so low in the spending?
Ms. Templin?
Mr. Chair and Representative Whitty, I don't know, I don't remember the, what economists at MMB, if they were calling that period recessionary or not. It certainly seems like there were fears of a recession at that time, but I don't remember, if that was definitely a recessionary period, and could follow up on that.
Representative Whitty?
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I'm just looking at it and just, and recession, you don't know if you're in it or not until you look back, and I'm looking at this, and it sure indicates that. And, obviously, there was a lot of money that could have helped, through this. So,
Yes.
just curious if you hear anything or any data on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Whitty. Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to touch back on Representative Robbins' comments. I was at the time, I was at the county, and also I was a contractor, still am. But I remember back at the time, I think that was back when I think the state was even doing the forecasts, and they were concerned about where the revenues were gonna be, and all of a sudden, they came in higher than they expected. And as a contractor at that time, I know the COVID funds were coming out, and people were spending like there was no tomorrow. And so I know I saw that even at the county, and then I saw the reports here, is that the sales tax revenues were coming in extremely high because of everybody spending more on product than experiences, because they couldn't go anywhere. So I believe that relates, and I'm not surprised to seeing that, and also not surprised seeing it coming back down, because I don't know if it seems like whenever you flood the market with cash, what happens is, if you remember the Cash for Clunkers program, back when people got money to buy new cars and get rid of stuff, that the auto sales went like this, and then 2 years later, they went like this. And that's what we're experiencing in the contracting world right now too, where everybody bought everything they possibly could get for their homes or whatever, and now they're pulling way back. So all the money has been spent, and now they're back to the reality. And so I think that's why that number does not surprise at all with what was coming out for the report. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Ms. Templin?
Mr. Chair, for this slide shows the pattern of year-over-year changes for local tax revenue. And local tax revenue, again, is property taxes and local sales taxes. And the pattern for this over a 10-year period for local tax revenue is fairly smooth. You can see that the pattern is smoother, and year-over-year changes for local tax revenue during this 10-year time never fell below zero on a year-over-year basis. The next slide shows the pattern of revenue for school district taxes and for a 10-year period, and you can see the pattern here is a little bit lumpier in year-over-year changes in tax collections from school districts. In checking with my colleagues in the E12 area, tax collections of school districts, school district levies is affected by voter-approved levy amounts for operating purposes, capital projects, and debt service for buildings. Voter approval has been sporadic in recent years, and as you can see, levies were up by 1.95% in fiscal 2022 and increased by 0.43% in fiscal '23, and then jumped up again to almost 10% in fiscal 2024. Thank you. And then finally, this slide shows intergovernmental tax revenue and the year-over-year change over the 10-year period. And this is the sum of federal grants, federal aid, and you can see this line is pretty volatile for intergovernmental aid during this 10-year span, and you can see in fiscal 20 and 21 how the year-over-year change is almost 15%, and that is because the state received revenue, federal revenue during the pandemic, such as the American Rescue Plan funds and the coronavirus relief funds. And then finally, this slide shows, this is the line graph for all the sources of revenue. And what kind of stands out are the sources of revenue from property tax for school districts and local units of government. Those revenue patterns are much smoother relative to state tax revenues and intergovernmental revenue. So moving on, I have a slide here that just shows.
Excuse me, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Templin. Just back on that last one. So because the intergovernmental revenue tracks the state tax revenue so clearly almost the same, is the inference that we got a huge influx of federal dollars due to COVID, and as that waned and fell from the intergovernmental transfer from the feds, that's what's driving that?
Ms. Templin?
Mr. Chair, Representative Robbins, I think that there is a correlation there, and there is a relationship between the receipt of intergovernmental revenue and state tax revenues. There's definitely a relationship, and you see that in this analysis.
Representative Robbins,
Thank you.
please continue.
And then I have two more slides, and I'll finish up here. This slide shows local sales tax collections in isolation. I just wanted to kind of share the information in this slide on local sales tax collections from fiscal 15 to 24. In the slide, on the left side is the axis. It shows the growth in local sales tax collections over a 10-year period. In fiscal 2024, the total collections, or excuse me, in fiscal 15, total collections in local sales taxes was about under 400 million, and by fiscal 2024, local sales tax collections total about $1 billion. On the right side of the axis, it shows year-over-year changes and the percentage change. And you can see local sales tax collections have been sort of volatile. Receipts have gone below zero for local sales tax collections. And then the year that those collections went below zero was in fiscal 2021. But you do see, year-over-year changes that are, the pattern is, very variable. And that is also a function on a function of how many local sales taxes come online each year. In fiscal 2023 to fiscal '24, we see the local sales tax collections from the metro sales tax and the housing sales tax also come online, and you can see the receipts reflected in the fiscal '24 total. And then finally, I want to end this presentation just kind of reiterating something about the state-local fiscal relationship that my colleagues in House Research discussed yesterday. This slide just shows, how the state provides most of the tax revenue, to fund state and local let me rephrase that. This slide shows the state tax revenue as a percentage of state and local tax revenue. And so the state share of that total is, almost 70%. And most of that revenue, again, comes from income tax and sales tax. And this trend, I believe Mr. Swanson said started in 1971, and you can see, in fiscal 2024, again, 70% of all state tax revenue, how large of a percentage that is, and over 50% of state tax revenue comes from those two sources, individual income tax and corporate tax, And so with that, I am happy to answer any additional questions about state tax revenues, if you have any in the future. And now I will turn to my colleague, Ms. Highmark, to cover the property tax spending portion of this presentation.
Ms. Highmark.
Mr. Chair and members, as my colleague Cynthia mentioned, I'm going to be covering the expenditures side of the tracking sheet or the budget for this committee. The property tax aids and credits, also known as PTAC, is the third largest spender of general fund dollars after education and health and human services. I do want to talk about briefly, I'm going to do my best to not repeat the information that my colleague Ms. Templin presented or my colleague Jared Swanson presented yesterday regarding many of the programs here. Cynthia mentioned that 28% of state and local revenue is from local taxes, of which a large proportion is property taxes. That is not going to be the focus of this presentation. This presentation will focus much more on the expenditures portion of this committee. So when we look at general fund spending, as I said, property taxes, aids, and credits is the third largest spender of general fund spending. And that is a total of 8% compared to the remaining categories for general fund spending. Over time, we see property tax aids and credits spending increase over a 10-year period. In fiscal year 2014, the expenditures for this portion of the committee was $1.3 billion, and that has increased to $2.8 billion in fiscal year 24. There are different types of categories within the property taxes, aids, and credits portion. I'm going to focus primarily on property tax relief. These can come in the form of credits or refunds, and also local government aids. There are also miscellaneous aids and credits, which I will not speak in length about in this presentation. I'll primarily focus on local aids and property tax relief. So when we go into property tax expenditures by category, I want to highlight the first chart on the left is fiscal year 2024. That is the actual funding. There's nothing projected. And then if we look at fiscal year 2026, there's a difference. And I want to highlight the reason I'm showing fiscal 2026 instead of fiscal 2025. And that is because in fiscal 2026, the renter's property tax credit will be completely phased out and will be converted into an income tax credit. And so it is no longer showing up in the expenditures side of this committee. If you look at the graph on your left, or the chart on your left, you'll see that aids to local governments make up about 45% of the total expenditures of property taxes, aids, and credits, and refunds make up about 44%. That changes drastically with the phasing out of that renter's property tax credit. Refunds become 36% of the total property tax expenditures, and aids stay relatively stable at about 48% of the total expenditures. Talking about property tax relief, there is one mechanism for property tax relief, which are refunds. There are multiple property owners that are eligible for refunds based on different characteristics. The most prominent or the most well-known is the homestead credit refund, where you get a refund for owning and paying property taxes on your primary residence. There's the targeting property tax refund, which is if your property taxes increase above 12%, you receive an additional refund from the state. The renter's property tax refund, which will no longer be a program after fiscal 2024. And then there are some other different refund payments, such as the sustainable forest incentive payments and the political contribution refunds. As I said previously, this is about 44% of the property tax base in fiscal 24, and then that will decrease to about 36%. Getting into the different types of refunds by category, in fiscal 24, we see the homestead credit makes up about 69% of the total refunds. And of course, that increases drastically to about 95% in fiscal 26 when that renter's property tax refund is no longer a refund, but instead an income tax credit.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Highmark. Looking at this, or the previous slide, can you just describe more clearly for me what the impact is of changing the renter's credit to the income tax credit in the budget? Like, as we're tracking that, I know it's no longer going to be counted as a tax expenditure, so help me understand the math there.
Ms. Highmark.
Mr. Chair and Representative Robbins, I'll do my best. I may ask for some help from some colleagues. My understanding is that the renter's property tax, as you mentioned, is an expenditure currently, as is on the spreadsheet. When it becomes an income tax credit, then that would be a reduction in revenue, and so it would be tracked as a reduction in revenue rather than a property tax expenditure.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you. So how much, we can see what it was costing as a expenditure. How much is it reducing revenue as a credit? Do those numbers match?
Mr. Chair, Representative Robbins, my understanding with the transition from the renter's credit as a property tax expenditure to being a revenue loss on the income tax side, the estimates from 2023 showed that the cost of the renter's credit as a tax refund is higher, or is expected to be, or is projected to be higher because of other changes that were also made to eligibility for the renter's credit. And it's also, the projections were to be higher as an income tax refund as well because there was no application process. Taxpayers will automatically receive the tax credit on the individual income tax return.
Representative Robbins.
Thank you. So it will bring in, it will cost more in revenue reduction than it cost as a credit, but that's mostly due to eligibility changes. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mr. Chair, Representative Robbins, yes, the change for eligibility to household income, and there's also the change, the renter's credit before it was an application process and now as an income tax credit. It's, there's no longer that application process, and so taxpayers will automatically get it if they're qualified.
Thank you.
Representative Robbins. Please proceed, Ms. Highmark.
So the next slide, I have an illustration of how refunds work. Property taxpayers pay their full amount of property taxes that are due. They pay that full amount to local governments. Refunds are a program that are then paid by the state, and so they do have an impact on the general fund. They do not have an impact, a fiscal impact on local governments, because the total amount of property taxes is directly paid to local governments. It is then the state that pays refunds to the taxpayers. Moving on to a different type of property tax relief, we have credits. Again, depending on different characteristics for eligibility, you may be eligible for a property tax credit. There are multiple credit programs. Some of the examples I have on the slide are the Border City Disparity Credit, the Agriculture Market Value Homestead Credit, the Agriculture Preservation Credit, School Building Bond Agricultural Credit, and the Disaster Credit. Credits are a relatively small portion of the total property tax base. They're only about 5% currently, and they're projected to make up about 7% in the fiscal 26 base. Again, an illustration of how property tax credits work. A taxpayer who is eligible for a property tax credit pays a reduced amount of their property taxes. That means local governments receive less revenue in the form of property taxes. Therefore, in order to make up that deficit in projected revenue, the state pays credits directly to local governments. And so it's a different mechanism than what we would see for property tax refunds, but it still has an impact on the general fund. A third option for property tax relief is a shift, and generally these policy options may not have an impact on the general fund. Policy options such as exclusions such as a market value exclusion, such as is eligible for certain veterans and their spouses who have who are categorized as being disabled. These options transfer the burden of property tax payments onto other properties. So if you have an exclusion in terms of the valuation of your property, when local governments want to collect their total property taxes, they will then shift that burden of that value that was not collected onto different properties. These shifts.
The gentleman from Lyon.
Thank you, Chair Davids. This is Highmark. Just kind of a question along those lines. It can be directly related to this, but do we have a total amount? So like of all the shifts that the legislature's passed into law, whether it's the veteran stuff, whatever that is, do we have a total of what we're estimating that impact on local units of government? So let's say in this legislature's infinite wisdom, we say, you know what, let's, instead of just having a shift, let's actually fund those shifts, what that cost would be.
Ms. Highmark.
Mr. Chair and Representative Swazinski, when we receive revenue estimates from the Department of Revenue for a specific program, such as an expansion of the disabled veterans market value exclusion, oftentimes the Department of Revenue includes information such as how much money would be shifted onto other properties. That is also information that I can request from the department. I'm not sure that I would be able to get that information on all shifts across all categories, but I certainly can look into it for specific legislation if you'd be interested.
From Lyon.
Good, thank you, Mr. Chair, appreciate it.
Please continue.
So just to talk a little bit more about shifts, shifts can change the tax burden in several ways, such as they can shift cost across different property tax categories, such as onto different property classes, right? Or it can shift onto other taxpayers, different property owners, or it can shift across both. And so there's different implications if the legislature were to pursue a policy option such as a shift. An example to Representative Swazinski's question, when we have a homestead taxable market value exclusion for disabled veterans and their spouses of up to $300,000, which is not a refund, it's not a credit, it's an exclusion which reduces the total property taxes local governments can collect. Therefore, so local governments do not lose revenue, they shift that tax burden onto other properties. And in this example, approximately $44 million from 20,500 parcels was shifted in fiscal year 2024 onto other properties and taxpayers statewide. Now, that shift in $44 million may be felt more heavily in districts in which, or jurisdictions that have more qualified properties, such as if more disabled veterans are living within a specific area, then the shift would be felt more strongly by properties in that area. Moving on to local government aids, I'm going to first be focusing on general fund aids. There are lots of aid programs within the property tax aids and credits category. The most notable, in which my colleague Jared Swanson spoke about at length yesterday, was local government aid, county program aid, and township aid. There are also more recent programs. There was one-time public safety aid, which was $300 million distributed in fiscal year 2024, and tribal nation aid, which is a $35 million annual appropriation starting in fiscal 2025. I want to talk about within the category of local government aids. I have a graph that shows you the distribution of these different aids by fiscal year as well. So you can see LGA and CPA make up the largest proportion of local government aids and expenditures. There are other categories there. I'd be happy to talk about any of those other programs at length, that I'm not going to focus on them necessarily in this presentation. My colleague, Mr. Swanson, spoke extensively about local government aid and the total appropriations, but I do want to highlight what some of those local government aid payments look like. So for large cities, for example, Minneapolis and St. Paul received about the same amount in will receive about the same amount in fiscal year 2025. Of 81.5 or 0.6 million. For medium-sized cities, Virginia receives the highest with 6.2 million, followed by International Falls. And then for small cities, Sandstone receives a local government aid payment of 1.2 million, followed by Wells with 995,000. I have a graph. This is very similar to what my colleague, Mr. Swanson, presented. I have a few additional years, so we have a 20-year look back at the historic expenditures of LGA. You can see it starts off at about $440 million in fiscal year 2005, and increases up to $644 million in 2025. County program aid is totaled $344 million in aids payable 2024, which actually is fiscal year 2025. This is distributed to all counties in Minnesota, and there's a range of payments between the lowest to Lake of the Woods at about $100,000 to almost $40 million for Hennepin County.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just question on this one as you look at this. I think it's a little deceiving when you look at this. You say, wow, look at that increase. But I'd also like to see the following graph that shows what have been the mandates that have been sent out that have been unfunded that correspond with that. I'm sure that graph will go up significantly along with it, if not more, as we go forward, just to try to make sure we have full transparency in what we're looking at. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Same question for you as we look through these aids and the different things, LGA, county aids that go, and it would be interesting, and I know this is for future, but if you guys could grasp a study of like when cities or counties do different, not allowing certain products sold in their counties and cities, and like for tobacco, for instance, or for cigarettes, and we take in quite a bit of tax revenue on the tobacco, what that affects the counties and the cities when they do that, because we're splitting this money evenly and giving it back to them when you have people that do those. What I'd like to see the impact to our budget and impact to possibly even the counties, like when they make those decisions, if it can down the future. Thank you.
Ms. Highmark.
Yeah, Representative Joy, we'd be happy to work on that request. I think because we're also talking about different types of revenue, I'd like to loop my colleague Cynthia in with working on responding to that question.
Ms. Templin. Or are you talking the future?
Future, yeah.
Okay, very good. I thought she'd have it off the top of her head. Representative Harder, or Representative Joy? Thank you. Representative Harder?
Thank you, Chair Davids. My question is on page 42. You can go back a couple of slides. So you've listed the longstanding aids, LGA, CPA, and township aid. Okay, now down below, so public safety will get a one-time amount, right, and that'll go away. So the next one with the tribal nation aid of 35 million, okay, is that one-time aid? If it's not one-time aid, is that going to affect the dollars that should be going to the LGA, CPA, the town aid? And if it isn't going to affect those three things, where is the money coming from? 'Cause
Ms.
the surplus
Highmark.
is gone, thank you.
Representative Davids and, sorry, excuse me, Mr. Chair and Representative Harder, in terms of the Tribal Nation Aid, it is an ongoing program. So it is a $35 million annual appropriation that would start in fiscal 2025. It is independent from the other aids that are within this category, so it would not impact the amount of aid that would be going to local government aid, county program aid, or township aid. In terms of the impact that this might, that this would have, this ongoing appropriation would have on the budget outlook, right, or the forecast or the projected deficit. My response to that would be, there are a number of expenditures and there are a number of revenues, and as we total those expenditures, we do see going forward that is projected that our total expenditures would exceed our total revenues. And so I couldn't necessarily say that it is specifically this program because it is the sum of all expenditures that would be impacting the projected deficit.
Representative Harder?
Thank you, Chair Davids. That's interesting. Because while I appreciate what the state is trying to do for the tribal nations, I am concerned about, again, I'm gonna go to the number of mandates. People don't like to hear the word mandates, so I'll use the word requirements, right? The state requires counties and townships and cities to do all these things that are very costly. And it's just really unfortunate, because I would like to see more money going to cover those items. And so I'm just curious, how that's gonna affect, long-term, because once you start a program, it's really hard to scale it back. And the reason why it's hard to scale back is that people get used to the money that comes in the door. And so if you say, I'm sorry, we need to scale back because the revenue isn't coming in. I mean, we have a lot of upset people then. And that's why, at the county level, I was generally against starting new services or programs, because you can't scale it back once you start. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Harder. Please proceed.
Right. The next slide that I had planned was the county program aid, just again, a look at the historic expenditures. So we can see in fiscal year 2005, there was a total payment of county program aid of $112 million, and that increases up over that 20-year period to $342 million in fiscal year 2025. I want to talk briefly about the total spending for township aid. As my colleague, Mr. Swanson, mentioned yesterday, township aid is relatively stable at about $10 million annually since it was enacted. The total aid payment in aids payable 2024 will be $9.29 million to all 1,778 towns in Minnesota. And again, just an illustration of what these payments look like. Aid payments range from $45 to Reinhardt Township in Polk County to up to about $18,500 to Pryor Township in Big Stone County. I also want to talk about some additional aids. Local Homeless Prevention Aid is a program that has an annual appropriation of $20 million. This program allocates $17.6 million to counties and $2.4 million to tribes. And this aid is stipulated to be used for the funding of new or existing homelessness prevention and assistance projects or programs within those local governments. Statewide local housing aid also receives an annual appropriation of $10 million. For fiscal year 2024 and fiscal 2025, this annual appropriation was actually increased to $22.5 million. $15.3 million of that appropriation goes to counties. $2.25 million of that total is transferred to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. $4.5 million goes to the 37 cities not located in a metropolitan county that have a population over 10,000. And $2.7 million of that statewide local housing aid goes to tribes. This aid is designated for local governments to develop and preserve affordable housing and to help those experience homelessness find housing. I want to speak briefly about local government aids that are non-general fund aids. The first is the local government cannabis aid. This aid is funded through a 10% gross receipts tax on retail sales of cannabis products. 20% of the total cannabis tax revenue will be deposited into the local government cannabis aid account, and this will be distributed 50% to counties and 50% to cities. Cities that are eligible are those that have licensed cannabis businesses, and this is distributed to all counties. This aid is a general purpose aid and can be used at the discretion of local governments.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the projected governor's budget, doesn't he actually cut this back significantly?
Ms. Highmark?
Mr. Chair and Representative Johnson, yes, in the governor's proposed budget, it would be to remove the local cannabis aid program, and that all of the cannabis receipts, rather than that 20% designation, I'm sorry, let me go back to look at my side. Yeah, rather than that 20% designation to counties and cities, that would be eliminated, and then 100% of total cannabis tax receipts would just be deposited to the general fund.
Thank you.
Representative Johnson. Okay, please proceed.
So I want to talk about, there have been some issues with the rollout of the cannabis gross receipts tax. And so we aren't seeing any projected payments in 2024. We're seeing minimal payments, 0.18 million in 2025. And then we are expecting those local government cannabis aid payments to increase to 13.1 million in fiscal 27 and increasing up to 18.3 million in fiscal 2029. And I want to say that this is the total local government cannabis aid payments. And so 50% of that, again, would be deposited to all counties, and 50% of that would be deposited to cities that have a licensed cannabis retailer. The final non-general fund revenue, the final non-general fund aid that I'll be talking about today is the local affordable housing aid. This aid is funded by a 25.25% metro sales tax. And the proceeds from this tax will be distributed 25% to a metro city aid account, 50% to a metro county aid account, and then the remaining 25% to MHFA for the state rental assistance account. Metro counties and cities with a population of over 10,000 are eligible to receive this aid. And this aid is designated to help local metro governments develop and preserve affordable housing as well as combat homelessness. Projected payments for local affordable housing aid increase. There was no local affordable housing aid in fiscal 24. Fiscal 25 reflects 5 months of tax receipts, and then fiscal 26 through 29 reflect a full 12 months of collection of that sales tax. I just have a few more slides. The final is there are some revenue generating categories within the property tax side that I will mention. The first is the state general levy, which my colleague Cynthia and my colleague Jared spoke about at length. This is a commercial industrial property tax. This generates state revenue, which is deposited into the general fund. Local sales taxes generate local revenue. They generally do not have a state impact. Tax increment finance also generates local revenue, and minerals and aggregate taxes can generate state revenue, but these are generally distributed to non-general fund accounts for distribution. Just a little historic information about the state general levy. The state general levy generated about $18 million in revenue in fiscal 24. This is 2% of the total general fund revenues.
Thank you, Ms. Highmark. Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Highmark, if we can just run back to that local affordable housing aid slide.
Yes.
So just to make sure I'm understanding it, that's for the metro counties with that new 0.25 versus the statewide local housing goes to non-metro counties, and they're just given a straight appropriation of 10 million annually or in a biennium?
Ms. Highmark.
Mr. Chair and Representative Robbins, there is an annual appropriation of 10 million for the statewide local housing aid that was increased in fiscal 24 and 25 to 22.5 million. But yes, that is different from the local affordable housing aid, which is from the Metro County sales tax and then distributed to metro counties and cities.
Representative Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So the other side of that metro sales tax was 0.75 for transit. Is that not considered one of these local aids?
Ms. Templin?
Mr. Chair and Representative Robbins, I just want to make sure I understand the question. You asked about the 0.75% metro sales tax. That is revenue that's spent by the Transportation Committee and within the jurisdiction of that committee.
Thank you.
Representative Robbins?
Thank you.
Okay, please proceed.
So historically, looking at the state general levy, we see that total collections for the state general levy have actually decreased since fiscal year 2014. Fiscal year 2024, the total amount collected for the state general levy was about 700 million, which is a decrease over that 10-year period from about 840 million. And that is the portion of my presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, if anyone has any additional questions for myself or for my colleague, we'd be very happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much. Now, were we going to do spreadsheets or not? Okay, no spreadsheets, okay. So with that, any questions? What we will do at this point then is we'll have Representative Johnson has the presentation to make.
I didn't know which was for. Thank you, Mr.
And
Chair.
thank you so much, Ms. Templin and Highmark. Thank you.
You want him up there?
No.
He wants me to. Thank you, Mr.
Let's do that afterwards. Is that okay?
Do that afterwards?
The treats? Is that
Okay.
We'll get this done. We'll celebrate your big victory.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if you could go to the front table there, sir, and I understand we have a couple folks who'd like to testify, so we'll run through the bill, get in the shape the author wants, if it's the will of the committee, and then we'll hear testimony. So Representative Johnson moves House File 4.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
then now Representative Johnson, now, members, this is an amendment to get the bill in the shape the author likes so we can debate the bill as the author wishes. So Representative Johnson moves the H0004A1 amendment. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Now we have House File 4 as amended in the shape the author would like. Could you please present your bill, and then when you've done that, then we'll go to testimony. So members, we have the House File 4 with the 4A1 amendment attached.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. I'll try and get this done before anybody gets hangry, I know. But one of the things that we had heard when we were out talking to people at the doors was the high cost of living and the challenges that were being experienced, whether that was food, whether that was property taxes, that was mortgage, just basic getting to work. And what this, and I made a commitment, and other Republicans made a commitment that we will start looking at that and addressing that. Unfortunately, the high costs are the high costs, but we need to start showing that we are responsible for the money that taxpayers sent in to the state and hoping that we're responsible in spending it. This bill here, what it does is it moves on that commitment to our taxpayers or homeowners, to our constituents, that we are responsible with their money. And if passed by the voters, the amendment would establish a tax relief account that would be funded using money from a projected surplus. The surplus would be equal to the amount of which projected revenues exceed 105% of projected expenditures as determined by the November forecast. As we go through, and as we're all out there, if we overpay, we expect to get a refund. We don't say to a business or somebody to say, that's okay, go spend it on what you feel you want to spend it on. We worked hard for that money. Homeowners, taxpayers, worked hard for that money. They have a trust in us to spend it wisely. And if there's more than is necessary, we should send it back. An example of what happened over the last, with the surplus that was already there. What could have been done by homeowners and taxpayers with that money for the relief? Depending upon the day you turned on your computer or you read the news, we're getting $2,000 back, we're getting $1,200 back, and then all of a sudden it became $200 back to a select few, which they spent $22 million to do. This would actually put in the Constitution and codify. That doesn't happen. The money's there, the money goes back. It goes back to the people who paid it, whether it's through income tax or property tax or ways that they sent that in. I believe that's just right. That's what we need to do, and that's the responsible thing to do. So this is for the families. This is for individuals. This is for people starting out in the world that has sent the money to us that have worked very, very hard. This is for seniors. This is for everybody, not just a few. If you participated and sent the money in, this is so you get to see that money back when the money is not needed because we over-collected. So, thank you, Mr. Chair, and committee members. I hope for your support.
Okay. Thank you. Now, for members that are new on the committee, when we hear a bill, I generally let the author present. A very good job. And then I'll ask for people that wish to testify on behalf of the bill, those that have concerns, and then we always want the department to be able to testify on a bill. So we'll go through that process. So is there anyone here that, before we go to then member questions, we wrap it up with member questions. I believe we have a couple testifiers here, if you could come forward. Okay, I have listed here Ray Ann Lee and then Nan Madden. So please state your name for the record and present your testimony.
Thank you so much, Chair Davids and members of the Taxes Committee. My name is Rayanna Lee. I'm the Legislative and Coalitions Director for Americans for Prosperity here in Minnesota. I apologize, I'm actually losing my voice, which is unfortunate because the one job I have is to talk to you. We are the nation's premier grassroots organization, and we are a community of millions of concerned citizens that advocate for solutions based on proven principles to tackle the country's most critical challenges. And we thank you very much for the opportunity to testify in support of House File 4. I did also submit a letter that details our remarks in a little bit more detail, so I'll just summarize quickly here. First of all, this is fantastic. This is how a constitutional amendment should be. One page, clear to the people, not something that, is one paragraph and then has 12 pages of consequences behind it. So we thank you very much for that clarity. We applaud the proposal to return the surplus funds to taxpayers. After all, Minnesotans, not government officials, are the best stewards of their hard-earned money. I will shamelessly plug oneexpensiveminnesota.com that we created after the spending blitz of 2023. As many of you know, grassroots is our game, and the folks that we talk to every day at the doors tell us that their wallets are growing thinner while the government has grown faster than ever. And they often feel like they are not getting the bang for their buck. Taxpayers, Minnesotans, are not unlimited ATMs. House File 4 opens up the dialogue to discuss Minnesota's notoriously high tax rates. And as we have seen over the years, we are overtaxed, so much so that we have seen surpluses that amount to more than double the entire state budget of Nebraska. While we are supportive of money going back into the pockets of hardworking Minnesotans, we would offer a challenge. What if they never had to lose that money in the first place? So we also would propose considering a trigger so that when there are revenue surpluses, tax rate reductions go into effect, or even bracket consolidations to cut rates. Furthermore, we propose an overhaul of the way the state budgets in a way that removes the volatility and puts the state on a more reliable track that doesn't offer temptations to blow up the budget and expand state government by 40%. Just a few high-level points to touch on of our recommendations. This would include limiting spending to trend revenue growth along with Minnesota's economic performance with a deficit break that helps keep spending in check. This would allow for emergency appropriations with a supermajority vote similar to bonding, coupled with the requirement to offset these expenditures in future budgets. And finally, establishing a robust reserve fund management to ensure surpluses are used to reduce debt, and then return to taxpayers. This is obviously a very complex matter with many ideas and solutions, and one person or organization does not have all of the answers to solve these issues overnight. But we are on the ground every single day talking to Minnesotans, and the number one thing that they say is how unaffordable living here has become. We are looking for bold solutions, and we thank you for having these hard conversations and taking on these challenges. We are very grateful that you're here discussing tax reform like House File 4 and doing the people's work in a public forum where we can engage in the marketplace of ideas to compile a bill that works for our state. And finally, I will just say that responsible budgeting is important to everyone, no matter their political views. And thank you for having these conversations, hearing these bills, and showing up to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any member questions? Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank
Lee.
you.
If we could call Nan Madden forward. Please state your name for the record.
Chair Davids and members, my name is Nan Madden. I'm director of the Minnesota Budget Project. The Minnesota Budget Project is a program of the Council of Nonprofits, and our mission is to identify and advance public policies to make Minnesota a place where everyone can thrive, regardless of who they are or where they live. And I appreciate the opportunity to share our concerns with House File number 4. The legislature already has the authority to use projected budget surpluses for tax rebates or tax cuts, and our current system allows that to be done in a public debate that weighs the alternatives and the implications of those decisions in the short term and the long term. We have a longstanding position that budget and tax decisions should not be made in the Constitution, because once it's in the Constitution, it applies in every circumstance, and circumstances that are very different from circumstances today. A constitutional amendment that puts artificial limits on revenues or spending weakens the ability of Minnesotans to influence the tax and budget decisions that impact their lives. It instead turns important decisions over to an arbitrary formula that does not respond to current conditions, changing demographics, emergencies, or the priorities of your constituents. Constitutional budget or revenue limits also blur lines of accountability. In a representative system of government, elected officials have the responsibility to make tough decisions about how to balance revenues and spending, and the public can hold them accountable for the decisions that they make. A constitutional amendment that predetermines tax or budget choices limits the ability of elected officials to respond to the public, and it makes it more difficult for the public to hold them accountable. Minnesotans want common sense solutions to the challenges they face in their everyday lives, but these kinds of constitutional amendments circumvent meaningful public debate about what level of services Minnesotans want from their government. Constitutional limits may prevent public investments that keep up with pace of growth in the economy, in changes in our population. And so the ability to build roads, fund schools, fund our nursing homes, train our workforce, invest in Minnesotans' health and well-being, and maintain other services are diminished over time. Constitutional limits restrict the state's ability to respond to a crisis, to rebuild when coming out of a recession, or respond to substantial changes in circumstances. And you had a good conversation earlier about the kinds of unusual events or changes in the economy that happen when the state is coming in and out of a recession that creates unusual percentage increases or percentage drops in revenues. And these kinds of proposals often lock in the drop. And so kind of lock the state in at recessionary levels. Some concerns about this particular proposal is that it requires certain kinds of tax cuts without considering other options for use of the funds, and could require tax cuts that create or worsen future deficits. This proposal, in short, does not give you more tools as policymakers. It instead ties your hands. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Madden. So you're undecided on this one?
I'm pretty clear on
No,
this
no,
one,
you're
Mr.
very
Chair.
clear. As always, your testimony is very well thought out. Thank you for that. Any questions from members for Ms. Madden? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Sorry
much.
to get in
Look-
between you and your treats.
Well, yeah. Never put testimony between me and a treat. The gentleman from Lyon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this would just be a question to the author, or just maybe a general statement, but, I appreciate the idea. I think you've got, a real winner here. And, just listen to some of the testimony and, whenever politicians talk about returning money to taxpayers, it's by some, it's considered tying the hands of government. And, I think that, getting politicians' hands out of people's pockets is a good thing. And, I appreciate the vision in this bill, and I'm going to support it today. I appreciate the job. I think you did a wonderful job presenting the bill, so thank you.
Thanks so much. Is there anyone in the audience that would, Representative Whitty?
Thank you, Chair Davids. Thank you, Representative Johnson, for bringing this bill. At the doors, I heard from many that are seniors that are on a fixed income, and they were going through the recession, and that little extra, the 20% in grocery costs up, the increase in property tax. Everyone lives on a budget. We have to figure it out, and we grew our budget by 40% with the surplus. And we can debate if the money was used in a proper or how it was, but the government grew and we didn't stay within our budget. And I think this bill allows people to have the money in their budgets so they can manage through some of these crises that they go through. So I appreciate you bringing this bill, and it allows Minnesotans to have their budgets individually and figure out how they should spend their money. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Whitty. Anyone else like to testify from the audience for or with concerns? And I always allow this time for the department to, I would normally ask them, do you support this bill or do you have concerns? And then they would say we're neutral type of thing. So I don't know where they're at on this one, but well, it's unfortunate they're not here to tell us their position. So with that, what we will do is we will take the vote up on this bill, and I've got a few closing comments, and then it's, well, before we vote on no, we should vote on the bill first, because that could be bribery. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I will, Representative Johnson renews his motion that House File 4 as amended be recommended to pass and sent to the Ways and Means Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Now, some very important things. Well, let's kind of just, let's make Representative Johnson tell us what he's doing here at the end. I would like to thank the testifiers, Ms. Madden, Ms. Lee, thank you very much for coming in today. Then I would really like to thank Ms. Templin and Ms. Highmark. Great information, and I listened, I actually listened. And there was something you said that kind of caught me here. There's some questions, and I think Ms. Templin said, we'll get back to you. Yeah. You know what it is with House Fiscal and House Research? When they say that, they get back to you. Mm-hmm. So they are a wonderful resource as we work through the tax bills in tax committee here. Both House Fiscal and House Research are very, very good to work with. That being said, Mr. Representative Johnson, this was your first bill as a freshman, right?
That is correct.
What does that mean?
I believe that means that we all get to leave with a little treat in our belly.
Where's it from?
So today, and I'd like to just throw a shout out, we have said this many times, how we cannot do this job without our significant others, spouses, partners. And in this case, I could not have done it without my wife, Mary Beth, who went and ran and received these while I was in committees today. So that's how we were able to get nice, warm, was warm at the time, hopefully it's still there. Warm caramel rolls from Lake Elmo Inn, freshly made
Lake
this morning.
Elmo Inn?
Yes, they are located in Lake Elmo. Anybody who's from Washington County probably have fond memories of the Lake Elmo Inn because they have an event center that caters, but they also have a restaurant. If you ever want to have a true Christmas feel, you go there during the holidays, and it's decorated to the hilt. But it's been around for quite a while, but the chef who owns it, John Schultz, started there at 16 years old as a dishwasher. And then he went on to become a chef, and now he currently owns it, still cooks there, still works there. They have wonderful food, great reputation. You will see the food that's up there. It's caramel rolls. Also, if you don't like nuts that are baked in there, we do have some cream puffs and some chocolate strawberries that they're also known for. So there are utensils up there and napkins up there, so please enjoy.
It's just like Christmas. Thank you. Okay, whatever freshman has the next bill. Beat that.
Yeah, real quick commentary.
Representative Warith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just like to thank Representative Johnson and gave him the background there as well, but also just a gentle rebuke for setting the bar so high.
It's gonna be tough, members. It's gonna be tough. So with that, anything else for the good of the order?
There are 4 freshmen on the committee, by the way, Mr. Chair.
We'll hear their bills first, of course. No. So with that, good government all the time. We're adjourned.